the Chelsea Library for having me do some of these classes. We've been doing them for just over, I think, 2 years now, and they're so much fun, and I hope y'all enjoy them as well. But tonight, bakery science. And we'll go through just a basic overview. Basically, what we're going to talk about is the ingredients and then how to mix them to get some really, really yummy stuff. And if you've got questions, like Stacey said, just type them in and we'll get to them as you ask them, so that we're hopefully everybody gets some really clear ideas on my favorite thing, baking. All right, so we're going to look at the different ingredients because they matter, and then how do you mix it? So what do you need and how do you put it together to get the different treats, cookies, cakes, muffins, breads, scones, cookies, pie, cookies. I think I mentioned cookies because I love cookies. Chocolate chip cookies are my favorite. All right, well, let's back up for a second. So is there a difference between cooking and baking? Well, yes, it's a really, really big difference. With cooking, you can fix things as you go. You can kind of add some spices in, you can change the direction on something, you can make it beef or chicken or just vegetarian, you can do all kinds of things with it. But with baking, it really boils down to chemistry. This is where science and art meet together, in my opinion. So, because once you've mixed it and it goes in the oven, it's it. You can't fix it. There's nothing else you can do to it. You just pray to the pastry gods that it works and that you did everything the right way and that it comes out as you intended. To get that, like if you're planning to make a birthday cake for somebody, you want it to become a cake, you do need a bit of planning. You have to try and figure out some things as you go and have a plan for the whole process to then have the cake come out. And it does require a basic understanding of chemistry, moisture and solids and dries and liquids and how they all mix together. So the key, the single key to all of that is following a recipe and measuring precisely. So let's dive right in. So measuring is a crucial part of chemistry. There is a very big difference between volume and weight. A ton of bricks is not heavier than a ton of feathers. They're both a ton. You just have a lot of bricks and even more feathers. So there's density. And as the picture on there, I hope you can see that really shows, is there's a different weight to different foods, and that matters. So you have to measure and know the difference between volume and weight. A cup is not always 8 ounces. Sometimes a cup with something like molasses is really closer to 10 ounces. Or a cup could sometimes be 5 ounces of something lighter like coconut. So it just depends, and that really does matter because, again, it's chemistry and it will change what you're making.
We have a question from Sydney.
Yeah.
She says, isn't baking required to be more precise than cooking?
Absolutely, yes. You've got very little room for error with baking. With cooking, like I said, you can kind of add some spices or throw something in as you're cooking it, but with baking, you can't do that. You're exactly right. It has to be precise, which is why you should really always measure by weight the ingredients that you're using. Grams are more accurate than ounces, but for us here in the US, ounces are perfectly fine. They work really well. And scales aren't that expensive, but a scale is going to be your best bet. All right, so measurements, we're all set on that. So next we've got some of the different ingredients. So there's the core ingredients: flour, sugar, butter, eggs. Then we've got some other things, leaveners, and I'll talk about those in a second. And then my all-time favorite thing on the planet, chocolate. We can't talk about baking without talking about chocolate. So the first ingredient we're going to talk about is flour. There's different kinds of flour. There's actually about 25 different kinds of flours. really in a bake shop here at the bakery, we use about 7 different types. And the different types of flour will affect what you have. So one of the things I talk about is with flour, sugar, butter, eggs, those are the 4 ingredients. Are you making a cookie, a muffin, a birthday cake, a loaf of bread? Because they all have the same ingredients. It's what you do to them and the flour that you use that will make the difference. And there's the different types of flours, because sometimes you'll go to the grocery store and you'll see there's a whole shelf of different flours. And each of those flours has different uses. So there's cake flour that's used for cakes. There's pastry flour that's used for pastries. All purpose is kind of the middle of the road, can go either way, cakes and pastries or breads. It's kind of an all-purpose general help along. Then we've got bread flour and high gluten flour and things that have that are just for those things, specifically breads. So there's gluten in flour. People hear a lot talk about gluten. It's a protein, and when the flour gets wet with water or milk or whatever else you're using that's liquid, that develops the gluten, and those strands get long and stretchy. And the more you work it or knead the dough if it's bread, or mix the batter if it's muffins, those strands will get long and strong. And the longer and stronger they are, the more tough the baked good is going to be. Hopefully this hasn't happened to anybody, but if you've ever had a biscuit that was like a hockey puck, it was just really, really tough and not very flaky and light, they overwork the dough. And that's what happens, is you get something that's really tough and not very enjoyable to eat. So knowing what you're going to make will help determine which type of flour you need to use. So if you're making, let's say, bread, you wouldn't use cake flour. And if you're making a cake, you wouldn't use bread flour. Hopefully that makes sense. So that's really one of the biggest things to start with is the flour that you're going to use, knowing what you're going to what you're going to make at the final product is going to be. All right. Next, we've got just a couple of types of flour. Like I said, all purpose is kind of a medium of the road, moderate gluten amount. Bread flour has more gluten because we want to have those long stretchy strands to make the bread. On the other side, we've got cake, which is nice and light and crumbly and soft and yummy because it's cake, right? I love cake. And then we have some non-wheat flours, rice flour, potato flour. We have some nut flours like almond flour, hazelnut flour. Those don't have gluten in them, but they can be used to make cakes and baked goods and not breads really. You need the gluten for that, but you can make some other really great pastries with the other flours. So again, there's a picture of some of them. If you want to make a cake, use cake flour. If you want to make some bread, use bread flour. All right, here we go. Eggs. I love eggs. Everything about eggs. Hard-boiled eggs, scrambled eggs, omelets, soft eggs, poached eggs. Everything except raw. I don't like raw eggs, but eggs are really great. I love eggs. It's part of the moisture in the formula and the recipe that we have. It adds some protein for our texture to get it nice and firm. Even if it's a cake, you're still going to need some eggs in there. And it provides a richness. There's just a feel in your mouth that's really nice and just tastes really, really yummy. That's mostly from the eggs. And then sometimes you'll see like a pie crust or maybe another baked good that has a really glossy sheen on it. That's from the egg wash. And the eggs do that. They just mix it with some water or some cream and then just brush it on, and that makes it nice and shiny. It also helps sugar stick to it so that you've got sugar sprinkles on the top. But eggs are a really important part of any bakery. We go through about 30 dozen eggs a week here in all of the different things that we make. So we go through a lot. I love them. Absolutely love eggs. All right, leaveners. So leaveners are something that we use to bring lift, and that's what it does, is it lifts things up. It, the picture you've got there is one of yeast. Yeast is one of our most common used leaveners, along with baking soda and baking powder. Has anybody ever made the baking soda volcano in science class, where you add the baking soda inside and you put the vinegar on it, it just splooshes everywhere? It's lots of fun and it's a giant mess. But that's what it does, is it creates lift. It creates carbon dioxide, and that lifts the batter up. So when you put your muffins in the oven, you'll watch them rise up nice and steady. That's because of the baking soda. And then there's like I said, on the picture, there's the three types of leavening. Biological, which is yeast. It's a living organism. It's a little microorganism that needs food and water just like you do. Chemical, which is baking soda and baking powder. And then there's physical. So, and I added that one because whipped cream on your pie or on your cake or on your hot cocoa or on a spoon just in your mouth is awesome. But you get that by whipping it. So that's a physical means of creating the lift. You're adding air pockets. And then steam. All of formulas have moisture of some kind, like the eggs are moisture, it's water or milk or some other kind of moisture that you use. And when that goes in the oven, that gets hot and it expands, and that creates steam. So there are some recipes that we make that steam is the only leavener, just because steam is awful powerful stuff. And it's really, really great to just rise up, like with puff pastry or croissants. It's good stuff.
Keegan, we have another question from
Yeah.
Joanne. She said, what do you recommend to substitute for eggs if you're making something vegan?
There's a couple of products out there. One of them is actually called Egg Replacer. It's a powdered product. It's a combination of starches. It's been around since the 70s. We use it here for some of the vegan baking that we do, and it works really well. A couple other things that you could use depending on what you're making. There's something called flax or ground flax meal that also will mimic the binding together that the eggs do. The other thing is, it's called agua faba. It's the liquid that's left over in a can of garbanzo beans. So you go to the store, you buy a can of garbanzo beans, and you make hummus with the garbanzo beans, or you put them in your salad. But save that liquid. That liquid can also be used as an egg replacer. We make vegan macarons, French macarons, with the agua faba. It makes and whips up just like a meringue does. So there's a couple things you can use, but it really depends on what you're making. So to know which one of those three things to use. And I hope that answered your question. But yeah, if you've got a more specific question, just you can email me at the bakery, and I think we'll put that up, so I can answer that question a little bit more for a specific recipe for you. All right, leaveners, done with that. All right, here we go. Fats. Fats where it's at. Fats where the flavor is. Fat is so yummy. And there's all kinds of fats. The fats are what adds flavor. It adds texture. So butter, we all know how yummy butter is. Olive oil has a very distinct flavor. I'm not sure if you've had that before, but there are some oils that don't really have a flavor. They're pretty neutral. And again, depending on what you're making, like you wouldn't use olive oil to make a blueberry muffin. That would not be very appetizing. But corn oil or a canola oil or a soy oil or something like that has a very mild flavor, you would use, so you showcase the flavor of the blueberry. So that's kind of how that works for the flavor. The texture adds smoothness, it adds moisture, it adds a mouthfeel that's really nice and soft and crumbly. And generally, the more fat, the softer the batter. So think like pancake batter or cookies. Chocolate chip, again, my favorite cookie, uses butter. So if you have too much butter, they'll be really flat, more like pancakes. If you don't have enough butter, then there'll be what I call cookie lumplets. They'll just be this little ball of chocolate dough that won't really do anything. It'll just sit there. I still eat them because it's a chocolate chip cookie lumplet, but they're better when they're nice cookies that you can dunk in milk, which I think I'm going to have some tonight. Anyway.
We have another question from
Yeah.
Jocelyn.
Yeah.
How do you adjust baking for humidity or weather so your baked goods don't go flat?
Well, there might be some other reasons that they go flat. If you don't have a temperature controlled environment without humidity, or if it's July or August and it's really, really humid out, there's a couple things you can do. Fans help a lot. You can also potentially reduce the amount of sugar. Sugar absorbs moisture, and I'll talk a little bit about that in a second when we get to that slide. And working quickly will help. But it might not be why your things were going flat. So there might have been an over mixing issue. There might have been, like, baking soda, baking powder gets old, and after a while it might not be effective anymore. So that could be part of it too. So I'd have to see what it looked like and why it, and determine why it went flat, but it might not have been the humidity. The one exception to that is going to be French macarons. Those are very temperature sensitive. And if it is very humid outside, don't make them. Because they won't rise, they will go flat because they'll have too much moisture from the humidity. So again, if you've got a specific formula or recipe that you want to ask me about, just shoot me an email. And like I said, we'll put my email up for you to send me specific questions on that. I hope I answered your question, Jocelyn. Fats. The other thing real quick to touch on is it's considered a fat if it's solid at room temperature, like butter, and it's considered an oil if it's liquid at room temperature. Now there's one that kind of does both. It can be solid or liquid at room temperature, and that's coconut oil. It is considered an oil instead of a fat, just because it has a lower fat content, but it does go solid when it's cold, but it's sometimes liquid at room temperature. It can kind of go either way, but that's the only one. And again, really distinctive flavor on coconut oil. All right, next up, sweeteners. My favorite thing, sugar. I'm going to say my favorite thing a lot tonight because all of it is. I love what I do, and I am so lucky to do what I do. Sweeteners, of course, add sweet. Did you know that sweet is the only flavor that we are born craving? We acquire the taste for salty, sour, bitter as we age, but sweet is the only one we're born craving. And I've never lost that craving. I still crave sugar. Sugar attracts moisture. So as I mentioned a second ago with the humidity, sugar it's called hygroscopic, and it absorbs the moisture from the air around it. And that can sometimes ruin what you're making, like French macarons. But that moisture content, you need that. I had one of my bakers forget to add sugar into the chocolate cake mix. And she was like, "What is wrong? I can't understand what's wrong." I was like, "Oh yeah, you forgot the sugar." She's like, "What do you mean I forgot the sugar?" I said, "Taste it." She's like, "Sure enough, she forgot the sugar." As soon as she added the sugar in, the moisture was there, and it smoothed out, and it became the cake batter that we're used to. Just because that's a property of sugar, which is, I think, pretty awesome. The amount of sugar will affect how soft or chewy it is. Have you ever had a cookie that's really thin and crispy, or a cookie that's soft and chewy, or like crispy on the outside and soft and chewy on the inside? That's because of the sugar. And there's no other way around that. There are some alternates to sugar, but they don't work as well. They work really well to replace the sweetening for what you're using, but not the other reasons that you use sugar, which is texture and moisture and crispness on it. So there's that. Sugars will caramelize. So if you have caramel, which is really just burnt sugar, that's really all it is. it gets a nice golden brown color and a really distinct flavor. And that's where you get that from, is the sugar. So when you put something in the oven, it will caramelize the sugar, and that's what gives it that golden brown color. And because of the moisture that the sugar adds, it will add a little bit. So it won't go stale like that day. It might be a couple of days before you want to eat it, before it goes bad. So let's talk about a couple of sweeteners. We've got two different types of sweeteners, dry and liquid. So dry sweeteners are the ones that we're most familiar with, the granulated table sugar, the white sugar that you get in the store. That comes from either cane or beet, and we're very fortunate to be here in Michigan, where it's one of the main growers of beet sugar. It's just up the road a little bit, couple hours, and it's phenomenal stuff. But they're identical. They're the same thing. It's sucrose is sucrose. If you looked at them under a microscope, they're the exact same thing. So they're completely interchangeable. Brown sugar is white sugar with molasses added back into it, light or dark. So it just depends on how much molasses is added. And then we've got powdered sugar or confectioner's sugar. For that, the companies took the sugar, the table white sugar, and just pulverized it. They just pounded it and pounded it and pounded it and pounded it to make it into a nice fine powder. And that looks really beautiful on cakes. You can put it on muffins. You can make frostings with it. You can do all kinds of things with powdered sugar. But the nice thing about it is it dissolves easily. It doesn't have that crystal anymore. Sometimes if something hasn't been mixed in, you'll get that crunch from the sugar crystals. But the powdered sugar doesn't have that because those crystals have been pulverized down into a powder. The other sweetener is a liquid sweetener, molasses, honey, maple syrup, corn syrup. They come in all kinds of shapes and sizes and colors. Molasses being really a robust flavor, really sometimes people say bitter. Honey is amazing stuff. It never goes bad. There was a shipwreck found several years ago from ancient times that had casks of honey on it. The seals were still intact. They took the seals off and the honey was still good several centuries later. Honey's amazing stuff. I just love it. Maple syrup, of course, this is an area that we get lots of maple syrup. We have maple trees all over, and sometimes in late February, early March, you'll see the maple trees that have been tapped, and lots of farmers nearby make the maple syrup, which is great. And then corn syrup, you can go to the store. It's really great for making candies, fudge, some frostings. I love sugar in all its forms, liquid or dry. Any questions so far on sweeteners or anything else so far?
Nothing else so far.
Awesome. All right, chocolate. I love chocolate. I love chocolate. I do. I love chocolate. There are really only three kinds of chocolate, and I know that sounds crazy, but that's it. Bitter and semi-sweet, milk chocolate, and cocoa powder. That's it. That's the only kind of chocolate there is. It's grown on trees. It comes in a pod that's about that big, football shaped ish. It takes a year to grow from the bloom to that pod, and it takes about 10 to 20 pods to make a pound of chocolate. So it's a pretty lengthy process. I talked to a friend of mine who is a nutritionist, and she said because it grows on a tree from a bloom, it is fruit. So when you're eating chocolate, you're eating fruit salad. And I'm sticking with that. I'm totally sticking with that. White chocolate is not chocolate. I was talking about this earlier. So on the screen, you can kind of see the pod and those little beans right there with it. That's the cocoa pod, and inside are the cocoa nibs, and that's what gets ground up to make chocolate. To legally be chocolate, you have to have some of that in it. and white chocolate doesn't. White chocolate is just cocoa butter with vanilla and sugar and milk added. It was invented in 1935 as a way to use up extra cocoa butter that was from the processing of chocolate. So that's how they invented white chocolate. So it's not really chocolate, even though it's because it has the cocoa butter in it. And I gotta say, I'm not a fan. I prefer dark chocolate. And when you go to the store and you see your chocolate bars, if it doesn't have the percentage on there, it's not really chocolate. It's candy. It's a confection. It still tastes like chocolate, but it's not quite the real thing. To have the percentage on there, that's the amount of the cocoa nib, that the cacao in that bar. So if it's a 70% bar, then 70% of that bar is the cocoa nib. The other 30% is something else: sugar, milk, cocoa butter. So that's what those percentages mean. And it's just really good stuff. And we're coming up on Valentine's Day, which is the day for chocolate. So if you like chocolate, get some really good chocolate and try it. I think you'll really like it. All right, next up, we've got, so let's back up a second. Those are the basic ingredients. We talked about flour, eggs, sugar, fats, and leaveners. Those are the basic ingredients that we use here. Now we do throw in some other things: lemons, blueberries, all kinds of fruits, all kinds of nuts. But those are the basic ingredients, because with those ingredients that we've just talked about, I can make anything. I can make cookies, I can make bread, I can make cakes, I can make pastries, I can make croissants. I can make just about anything with what we've talked about so far. Now, the difference is going to be in the mixing and how we put it all together. Because like I said earlier, flour, sugar, butter, eggs, the same 4 ingredients makes muffins, cakes, bread, pastries, croissants, and how you put them together is what makes them the different things. So one of the most basic things to use is the creaming method. Basically, it's where you take fat, usually butter, and sugar, and combine them in the mixer to the nice and light and fluffy. And then you add the rest of the ingredients. And that's usually how you make cookies. There's a few muffins that are made that way, and a few breads that are made that way. Quick breads like zucchini bread or banana bread. I like those too. But creaming is usually reserved for cookies. That's pretty much how cookies are made. Then we've got the muffin method. Now, it makes muffins. It also makes other quick breads: banana bread, zucchini bread. It makes waffles and pancakes. That's baking. Even though you're cooking it on a griddle or in something, that's still considered baking. So with the muffin method, it's pretty easy. It's the easiest thing to do. You once you have everything measured, you combine all your dry, your flour, sugar, baking soda, baking powder, salt, any spices you might be using. Then you combine all your liquid: milk, eggs, oil, and then you combine the two. And that's it. That's pretty much how you make a muffin. And then whisk with it together with a whisk, and that's it. Pretty simple, pretty straightforward. And that's where we get the term quick breads, because it is so quick to make. And they use leavening from baking soda, baking powder, or something along those lines.
We have a question from Tony. Do you have to cream ingredients until no sugar crystals are left?
It depends on the recipe you're making. So for some cookies, yes, you do. For some frostings, you absolutely want to do that. But for most cookies, you want some of the crystal structure still there and not completely beaten out, because that's going to give you some of the aeration and some of the lift that we're going to talk about, that we talked about for leavening. And if you go too far, it'll be too flat. So there's a fine line between here, like right there, that's either overmixed or undermixed. Because again, those cookie lumplets I talked about, if you under cream your cookies, they won't spread out. They'll just stay in a ball. But if you over cream it, then they'll fall flat and become really thin and not have much body to it. So for cookies, you want some cream. You want it to be creamed to the point that some of the crystals are gone, but not all of them. But if you're making a frosting to go on a cupcake, then yes, you do. You want it whipped and creamed a lot. So it just depends on what you're doing. And I know I'm trying to not say it depends, but it kind of does matter what you're making. I hope that answered your question. Oh, all right, laminating. So laminating is a process that's lots of fun, takes some time, where you layer butter and dough together to create flaky layers when it goes in the oven. That's most used for croissants and puff pastry, which are two of my favorite things. I love chocolate croissants because if you could, then you combine chocolate and a croissant, love it. So, but that's how you make your dough and you have your butter and you layer them together. You laminate the dough and the butter together to get the flaky layers to make puff pastry and croissants. And then the straight mix. You just put everything in the bowl and you mix it, whether it's with a whisk or a dough hook or beaters or whatever you're doing. And that's usually just for breads. There's a couple of cakes that are done that way, but there's also some cakes that are done with the creaming method. So again, it depends on the kind of cake that you're making. That will depend on, which method you're using. Any questions on the basic mixing methods and how we do that?
Nothing so far.
Awesome. All right. So basically, follow the recipe. This is not where you experiment. Cooking, you can experiment all you want. Baking, not so much. Follow the recipe. Scale your ingredients. This is actually as a specific term called mise en place. It's a French term that means everything in its place. So you mise en place all of your ingredients and you mise en place all of the equipment that you need, whisks, spatulas, pans, whatever it is that you need. You put all those things together and then you bake. So remember when I said it takes a little bit of planning? This is what I meant. Oh yeah, plan ahead. See what I did there? Because you want to have everything ready to go so that you're making it all at once. Last week I was making some red velvet whoopie pies, and I got called away from in the middle of mixing it, and it was gone for about 5 minutes, and came back and kept mixing and scooped them out and put them in the oven, and they came out flat because I walked away from it. The baking soda was used up, so it couldn't work in the oven. So that's why you want to plan ahead and have everything ready to go all at once so that it can just go right in the oven and come out the best it possibly can. I still ate the whoopie pies, by the way. They were still really good. They were just really flat. Following the recipe is crucial, not just the ingredients, but the process, the step by step process. And you can't take shortcuts and you can't skip a step because each step depends on the one before it being done the right way. And that's really where you want to make sure that you focus is on following the process the way it says and being accurate with your measurements. Now, a lot of cookbooks here in the US still use volume. They still use a cup, a teaspoon, a quarter of a cup, a half a cup. If that's what it says, do that. Don't worry about weights. If the formula is written in volume, which cups, do that. But if it's written in weights, do that because that's your best bet for success because the process is written for it to be in those measurements. So be accurate. If it says a cup, 1 cup. If it says 1.5, 1.5, not 1.5 plus some. It'll throw it off and it won't work. It'll be too dry usually. but you really want to make sure you're having fun. I mean, I have fun doing this every day. I love doing what I do. I love making cookies. I love eating cookies. So I just have fun with it. And not everybody enjoys the careful measuring, the planning out, but still enjoys doing things with food. That's great. You can cook and experiment and have fun all you want with cooking, not with baking. And then I think I mentioned this, but I want to make sure you follow the recipe. I know I've said it a couple times, but it really, really does matter. That's going to be your best bet for success, is making sure that you follow the recipe the whole way through. That's all I've got, unless you've got some questions. I do want to thank you for attending. I'm so appreciative you spent some time with me tonight. And I want to thank the Chelsea Library for having me. And what we'll do is, I'm wondering how I can get my email up. I should have thought of this before to add that.
You should be able to type it in the chat, or I can do that.
Oh, let me do that.
Yeah. And just make sure it says to all panelists and attendees. Tony says, accuracy matters. I took out a box of cornstarch instead of baking powder, ergo a flat cake.
Yep, that would do it. How did it taste though? Oh, okay. There, I think I am. I might need to have you do that. All panelists, here it is. I'm not the fastest typist on the planet. So there's my email. If you have a question on a specific formula or something that you want to know a bit more information on, please send me an email. I'll try to get back to you that day, if not the next. And I can do what I can to help you out, or come by the bakery and we'll have a chat. I love talking about this stuff, and hopefully you enjoy baking as much as I do, and have fun eating it once you've made it.
The cake with the cornstarch got thrown in the garbage.
I don't blame you. I'm not sure I would have wanted to try it either.
Okay, so if we have any other questions, go ahead and type them in, or raise your hand or whatever. To all panelists and attendees. Yeah, that's right. Let me retype just to make sure.
Oh, got it.
That should have showed up to everybody, I hope.
Oh, thanks.
Okay. If there are no more questions, we'll go ahead and call it. Thank you, Elle, for coming. Thank you, Keegan, for joining us.
My
Can
pleasure.
you really briefly tell us what the Lakehouse's open hours are currently?
We're open Tuesday through Saturday from 8 a.m. to 4 p.m. And this weekend is our pizza weekend. We're only doing it once a month until summer. So give us a call and have fresh pizza. We made here at the oven. We make the dough fresh, and it's really, really good stuff. So if you're looking for pizza this weekend, give us a buzz.
Okay, and Sydney says, do you have gluten-free options?
We do have gluten-free options. We have a few different things. Let me put the phone number in there. That's to the bakery. We have a carrot pineapple muffin that's gluten-free vegan. We have some biker bites. We have a couple of cookies that are gluten-free vegan. So yeah, we have a variety of different things. And on special order, we have a really delicious chocolate cake that we do called the NBC, because it's gluten-free, soy-free, dairy-free, egg-free, nut-free. And when I say that, people are like, well, what's in it? I'm like, chocolate. So yeah, we've got a couple really great things. So just give us a buzz and we can help you out figuring out what we can get for you.
Okay. I think that does it. I don't have any more questions.
Awesome.
So if you have any other questions, you can always email Keegan, or if you need more help, you can always go visit him or call. What we're doing is we are recording tonight's thing. So if you missed anything or you need to go back, we'll have it up on the website tomorrow.
Great.
All right. Thank you all for coming, and we'll see you at other programs.
Thank you.